All right, I think we're on and ready for interview for Advent number 4 after Jeff's inspiring message. But I mean, I totally want to talk about the message. I'm very excited to talk about your sermon, but you know what we really want to talk about is, I mean, here we are, home stretch before we add a baby girl. Everybody doing okay at your house?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've gotten to that stage where I think you're just like ready for it to happen, because especially Courtney, my wife, she's very in the uncomfortable stages of it all. So, but we're excited, but one thing at a time, because we got Chris. Of course, it was like whoever was thinking about scheduling this out really wasn't that smart. So that's anyway.
Oh, good. Okay, I know that the name is always a big secret, so you don't have to tell us the name unless you want to, of course, but do you at least have a name at this point?
We've got a list of names. It's kind of like how we did it with Major too. We felt like wanted to meet, we wanted to meet her before we make any big decisions, so we'll see. Okay. I'll say this, it's like, I mean, her older brother's named Major, so it can't be like Jeff. It's got
to be interesting.
Yeah. So anyway, we'll see.
Have a story. Yeah. Okay. Well, we're so excited, and usually you're the one getting to talk about it. So while I'm getting to talk about it, let me just make sure and say this. I just want you to know how excited we all are for you, and we are praying for you and Courtney for that delivery, for a safe delivery, and just looking forward to exciting news here. And it's not less than a week yet, right?
It's less than a week. Yeah, it'll be next Monday morning. So.
Oh,
yeah. So very exciting. So we're super excited. So thank you. And it's really cool to be a part of a, faith family like RPC, where everybody gets to kind of celebrate together, as we do for all our, the big moments in our faith family's life. So thanks for saying that, Lyndsay.
Yep, absolutely. Over the week too, this before we get into the sermon stuff, a question came in from a church member I thought I would also throw out at the beginning. Now that you are sitting in front of your bookshelf, that we are getting questions about what's in your to be read pile. What kind of books are you looking forward to reading at 4 a.m. when you're up dealing with a newborn or whatever?
Yeah. So we're going to be doing a sermon series on the parables in early 2022. So that's something that'll be on my mind that I'll be thinking a lot about. I'm about 15 pages into like a 500-page biography of John Calvin, and it's one of these with like 8-point font, and so I'm not sure if I'm going to make it through. I might have to speed read it, but it's an interest. It's just been interesting to me to see, like, when you kind of get into details of a lot of these larger than life figures, the life they led was much more complicated than kind of than the headlines would lead you to believe. And so, like, one of the funny things about Calvin, I mentioned this a couple weeks ago, is Calvin, he was on the run from plague, because there was a huge plague that was striking Europe at that point. So he was going from town to town, kind of on the run. Also, he's called into ministry he basically he finds himself in Geneva, and this guy Farrell, who is one of the town leaders, basically says God will curse him if he doesn't stay and lead the Reformation there in Geneva. And Calvin's like, okay. And the funny thing is I can't imagine if somebody said that to me, I'd be like, get behind me, Satan, man. I'm not staying here because you're going to curse me. Well, and so it's just funny how that's kind of worked. And then, Calvin was the kind of guy, he had most of the Bible memorized. He had most of the church fathers memorized. It's not like he was Google searching, what was that passage from Genesis? And he preached, when he was in Geneva, he preached every day, along with, his regular kind of leadership and practical matters. He also, he went through deep sorrow. He lost children when he was young. And I just think there's just a lot we don't, when you get into the details, it gets much more complicated. And I really like that, to see the humanizing aspects. So I'm going to do that, some Calvin. I've got a bunch of other books that I haven't read. I tend to buy books faster than I can read them. And I have, to make it more complicated, I have an extensive library at home. So I've gotten into the weird place where I don't know where any of my books are, because half of them are here, half of them are at my house. And so, and then I got a bunch in my car. I'm just a mess. So.
Well, and the ones that we borrow and don't tell you about that are now floating around the office. Yeah.
Yeah.
No one knows where those are. Well, and that's really interesting. I'll be interested once you like are able to spend more time in that book, because you're right. Calvin's life was super complicated, and just like the struggles he had with his dad and with his love life and all of those things, I know were really hard for him, but he didn't write a ton of personal stuff. So about how he was feeling about all that stuff. So I bet that I bet it's interesting. I just don't know if I bet it's interesting enough for me to try and dive into something like that. So you just tell me how it goes.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to make it. We'll see how far I can make it through. It's a slog. So I'm like, but we'll see.
Well, and that is that actually fits in so well, because, so much of what you talked about yesterday was not allowing your life circumstances to dictate your joy. And so Calvin certainly had lots of life circumstances. And you referenced this quote by Kierkegaard that was so good. I don't know if I've heard you say this before, but when you were talking about life is understood backwards but lived forward. So good. I dived into that for a long time and spent a long time in that quote, just thinking about it. And it just really spoke to me. It resonated with me so much. And then I got really tangled up in thinking about, I don't even know if I'm ready to say it's understood backwards. I think that's when we begin to journey with trying to figure things out. But even still, as I look backwards, at 42, the way I'm looking back at high school is really different than even at 25 when I was looking back at high school or something like that too. So I don't know. I think it's constantly a journey of, you know what I mean? Like how you understand what things look like in your life.
Definitely. Well, and even when we use the word remember, that you got to, that prefix re and then member, and you're taking the members of your memories and putting them back together, and trying to make sense of them. And in any moment in time, you have a different perspective. Your emotions, what the wisdom you've gained. And I think that's really important to remember constantly as you go forward. And that's one of the things I love about Kierkegaard is, I did one of the books I did. I'm very proud of myself for making it through. I don't know how I found this book. It was like an 800-page, like 8-point font biography of Soren Kierkegaard. And in the New Yorker review of it, it says, if you enjoy very long, dense books about people who never left their apartments because they were reading and writing in them and suffered silently, you'll love this book. And so I made it through. But I think Kierkegaard, and one of the things I love about him, and I think he wasn't that, for a while after his death, he wasn't that famous. He wasn't that impactful. And only later on did he become so. And I think it's because his wrestling with life is so modern. And what does it mean to have existence? What does it mean to live a life of meaning and purpose? What does love mean? He wrote very extensively about love, somebody who really wrestled, broke off an engagement and kind of tormented him the rest of his life. And so that's the existentialists. So there's a whole group of these guys, and they are mostly men, who I really like. Soren Kierkegaard, Albert Camus, and Dostoevsky. One Danish, Camus, French, Algerian, and then Dostoevsky, Russian. Very different kind of perspectives, but all kind of coming around to say, what does it mean to be a religious person, to find meaning, and not as an escape from reality, but as a driving into more fully experiencing life.
Yeah. So are you saying then in the midst of that, that's part of why we are looking back and putting the pieces back together, because that informs how we go forward? Is that part of what you're?
Yeah. So there's several things. So as Americans, I think culturally we're enculturated not to think much about our history. I think that's maybe a little different in the South, maybe than in other places. I think in the South, because of our history here has been so pronounced, it's always kind of, as Faulkner said, the past isn't gone, it's not even past. It's in the ground, especially like the Civil War, slavery. I mean, that's still a present reality we're wrestling with. But Americans, for the most part, are like, they look to the future. We're on this path of progress. And I think it can be dangerous not to try to think about your past and not to do it. And this is one of the reasons I love that Kierkegaard quote is because there's this phrase called terminal wistfulness. Okay, terminal wistfulness. And it's this view about the past. It's that nothing about the future will ever get better than it was in the past. Okay. And that's a very a human kind of view. It's kind of doom and gloom. But I like Kierkegaard because he's saying we can learn from the past, whether it was good or bad or whatever, but that's in the past. And we now have to make decisions about the future and live courageously with love, moving into the future, but not being terminally wistful about the past.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Okay. And it also then it makes me think, kind of on a separate but related note, this idea of kind of, I don't know, kind of claiming a sense of what may or may not actually be. Do you think that there is a tendency among people of faith to, yesterday we were talking about, or you were talking about changing circumstances, but keeping joy in the midst of the circumstances or whatever. And so I'm wondering, do you think that people, especially Christians, like we are expected to even just like fake it or like have a contrived sense of joy in the midst of what's going on, because that's just because we're Christians and there's an expectation that we are joyful. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I think I would not say we need to, or called to have a contrived sense of joy. And that's why I was trying to make a distinction between joy and happiness, I think, because joy, and remember, while yesterday we're talking about it, joy kind of exclusively in that Elizabeth and Mary passage in Luke 1, but like the Christian life is full of various virtues that we need to cultivate to live a full human life. And the theological virtues are faith, hope, and love. And I think as you bring faith, hope, and love together, joy is a part of it. But, hope, as I define it, is wrestling with despair, but not letting despair have the last word. I mean, this is Jesus on the cross saying, my God, why have you forsaken me? I mean, so Jesus isn't like, this was a great idea. I'm totally on board with being crucified. I love being tortured. This is great. No, it's a real identification with human suffering and sorrow. And I think as Christians, we're called to be joyful, but not in like a too sentimental of a way that causes us to escape, and like, so I think there's religions I think can function as escapist, like I just can't wait till I get to heaven to eat pie in the sky after we die kind of deal. But what is, if we see in the incarnation of God in Jesus Christ coming to earth and transforming relationships, the reality here on earth. And so how can our religious practices force us to be people of joy? So that might mean offering a word of hope to somebody who's hurting, that things will get better. It's not always going to be like this. Or, I always come back to like sports analogies, but I was thinking about this the other day. There's been all these, all the football teams have been having their like state championship games, and basketball's off. And I was thinking about my freshman year. This guy, Chris Woods, would pick me up as a freshman, and we'd go to 6 a.m. basketball practice. We'd practice at I think it was First Baptist of Spokane. And then we had an afternoon practice, and it was 2-a-days, and you were just so sore. And they did this like thing where they would throw the ball into the group of guys, and you'd just be punching each other, trying to get the ball. I mean, it was just ruthless. And I remember going, you do that and you think like, well, this is a lot of pain. This is a lot of agony and a suffering. But then you'd have guys that were veterans on the team who'd been around a while say, the hard work we put in now is going to pay off at the end of the year. We'll be able to play better defense. We'll get more rebounds. We'll play harder. And then when you win the state championship at the end of the year, you all of a sudden are going, oh, that was all worth it, even though it was miserable in the moment. And so you need these people who can come alongside, who are a little further along in the journey, who can say, hey, keep the faith, keep going. This isn't it. We got to persevere. And I think, this is one of the reasons I just don't know how people who don't have like a faith community, like a church, make it oftentimes, because I know we rely so much on folks who are further along and say, man, don't give up. You can do this.
Mm-hmm.
This is tough, but here where I've suffered, this is where I've had to persevere. So that's, but joy is understood much more in a bigger sense than just in my particular moment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, and you kind of on your own personal level, you talked a little bit about that yesterday too, that the circumstances of your life have changed, and figuring out what does it look like to hold joy in the midst of that. You even maybe teased about some circumstances, but you didn't give us any kind of details. So I'm just wondering, like in your own life, as you reflect back on times that you really had to figure out how to hold on to that joy, hold on to it, cultivate it. I don't know what words I went there. So I'm just wondering, like, can you think of a time? And if not, like, what did you do to kind of hold on to that joy in the midst of those circumstances that maybe were less than what you were hoping for?
Well, personally, and this is probably just comes from my, like, I don't know, distorted sense of self or of the world. But I mean, humor for me is a big way of keeping perspective and finding a sense of joy in kind of the absurdity of life. Oftentimes you're just like, are you kidding me? Here we are, and and so I think humor helps let the window of joy, the air, kind of come into difficult situations. But then I think also being part of a community, it's really hard to carry the weight of the world by yourself on this journey. And so I think to have friends, to have family, have a faith family that you can rely on and lean on for encouragement, and that you can offer encouragement to, are really important. And I think also, a deep, and I would broadly define a deep prayer life, that you have a certain robust spiritual life. You're able to be present to yourself, but present to God, and take your cares and concerns to God when you need to. And also sometimes just sit in silence and not try to figure it all out, and just, kind of let it be for a while.
Ooh, I don't know if I'm very good at sitting in silence and letting it be. It's going to have to be a spiritual discipline for me, I think.
Well, I mean, that's why they call it a discipline, right?
Yeah.
And I think we're all better at various times. And certain practices appeal to our personalities more than others do,
For sure.
And during different times.
I also feel like we have got to talk about the Barbara Brown Taylor story. Like, we can't talk about yesterday's sermon and not talk about that. That was like, oh, I just love that story. And of course, that also sent me into lots of thinking and processing, because the question for the turtle, right, was, am I being killed or am I being saved? And then Barbara Brown Taylor makes this point of how can you tell the difference, or you can't tell the difference, maybe, is more like the point. So that raised like a million questions for me. One, I'm wondering, were you saying when you were wrapping up the story, is the indication there that that because God has a bigger plan, we are always being saved, or are we actually sometimes being hurt? And also, I don't know, like I guess wrestle with me for just a minute about what does that look like and how do we deal with that in the midst of it? And I wonder, kind of taking if we taking it back even to the Kierkegaard whatever quote that we started with, does that change? Even does our experience of whether or not we were being killed or saved, our understanding of what happened then, does it change as we work our way down the journey and our understanding of our lives continues to change as well? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. See, I was like all over the place with that story.
Well, it's a great story. And I think, it's, Barbara Brown Taylor's gift as a storyteller and as a preacher. That's why she makes it on the list of the 100 most influential people in the world, right? I mean, and I think I use that. I mean, that's like one of those stories you're tempted to use every Sunday because I think you get something new from it every Sunday. Last time I used it was 2017. So I felt like enough people have sure enough memories that they wouldn't remember. But so you ask, I mean, I think great question. So I just don't think we know in the moment. And I think oftentimes what feels like it's killing us later on, it may have been used for good. And I think ultimately, as Christians, we believe that God's purposes will triumph in some mysterious way, that life and love will triumph over sin and death and suffering in the world. And that is a claim not on the evidence or like from out looking at the world. That's a claim of faith, looking at what God has done in Jesus Christ. So identifying with our suffering, but seeing in the resurrection the triumph of life. That's how I understand it. Now, obviously, how I would apply that pastorally to someone's life is going to be different for different circumstances and life situation. Somebody who's, I just got an email from somebody who's been diagnosed with terminal cancer and they've got 6 months to live. Well, probably right now is not the best time to say they need to be joyful, right?
Right.
In the cosmic sense in Christ, yes, I think that's true. But right now, that person's probably just like, what is happening? How's this happened to me? And how do we? And so that's why I mentioned that joy has got to have these other virtues along with it, and not just isolated, but has faith, it has hope, it has love.
Yeah. I think that's right. And so that even in the midst of the dragging, right, then we have these other tools that we're calling on, these other kind of faith tools that we're calling on, so that whether we're being saved or we're being killed, that we know that we're not falling apart in the moment, maybe.
Well, let's think about somebody, an addict, and a family and friends get around to stage an intervention. Okay. That person feels dragged and, their life flipped upside down. It's against what they want. But if they're willing to put in the hard work and do what's difficult, the long term will be much better than succumbing to the addiction. And I think like that might be a helpful, like there's just like things like that where we can't go around it. We have to go through the tough stuff to get on the other side. I'm not, Lyndsay, I'm not very good at, I think that's probably why I became a pastor, is like, I'm much more interested in the practical, like lived out ideas of the Christian faith. So some people want to talk about like joy in the abstract, and I'm much more like, well, tell me your life situation, and then let's, in light of scripture, see how might we characterize joy in your particular context and not in an abstract way. Because when we do it too abstractly, it just becomes like too ethereal and otherworldly. And it never like gets its feet on the ground.
Yeah. And you know what else too is kind of connecting back to what you said before when we think about this, that what we also get to know um, in the moments where we feel like we were being dragged, what we also get to know is that we're not being dragged alone, right? That we have this community of faith that's surrounding us. And I think that's really important as well, like you said, and that's how there's holding on to a sense of joy in the midst of those things too.
And one of the other things, Lyndsay, I would say is, especially in the Calvinist Reformed tradition, there's been, I think, a failure to really celebrate joy. Like there's a certain dourness, Christian anxiety, guilt, shame, that it's like if you have too much enjoyment in your life, you may, you may be in trouble. You may be on the wrong road. I read this interesting. You know, what's the children's book, the caterpillar one, The Hungry Caterpillar?
Right.
And so remember that story. So the guy who wrote that died recently.
Eric Carle.
What was his name?
Eric Carle.
Eric, yeah. And Eric, so there were a bunch of kind of retrospectives on his life. And I guess when he originally wrote the story, remember that the hungry caterpillar goes and he eats like 2 slices of salami, a sucker. You know, on Wednesday, he eats like 3 strawberries. And at the very end, he gets sick. Okay. Well, when Eric Carle originally wrote the story, the caterpillar didn't get sick. And he just enjoyed it and kind of went on. And then he became a butterfly. But the editors said, no, that's too much unadulterated enjoyment. And I think that there's, and Eric Carle always objected to that. I mean, he gave in because he wanted to publish his book. But I think that, like, in our society, and this goes all the way back to Augustine. Augustine was very worried about enjoyment. That I think this rope, and Lewis makes this point, and Chesterton does too, that like there's something, we shouldn't be afraid of joy and enjoying life, and we should celebrate that fact and not be too worried. And I think I've always been drawn to that view of the Christian life, one that is hopefully one that we have fun. We're not afraid to, throw a party. We're not afraid to go to a movie we like just because we like it. We're not afraid to eat a little too much ice cream maybe once in a while. And I think that kind of true sense of joy the world could really use right now.
Oh, absolutely. Well, and even if you look at Jesus, right, who was at the parties, but he also was very clear that he came in order for us to have abundant life. I mean, this sense of enjoyment is literally what we are intended to live or whatever. Yeah. Okay. So really quick on Chesterton, I also thought it was interesting, the quote you gave us there about joy being the giant secret of Christians. And which just really struck me, because I feel like we are living in a time where people in general are maybe not so joyful. I mean, we have talked a lot about just the amount of grief that people are having and how that comes out in anger and the road rage and the people hollering at each other at the stores and honking their horns and stuff all the time. And it feels like we are living in a world that is less joyful and is a little more angry. And so then this idea that as Christians, we have this giant secret that maybe I was just thinking maybe we're keeping it too much of a secret. We need to spread that out a little more or something.
Over the past 2 years, but especially like the first, 6 months to a year of pandemic and COVID, I was in a dark place for a lot of it. And so I was like, okay, how can I allow windows of joy into my life? So I was like, okay, I can't really go anywhere. I can't be around people. These are the things that I really enjoy. Okay. So I'm going to read stuff that I like to read, that I get joy of. And I'm going to use the United States Postal Service to bring me things that bring me joy. And so I ended up buying a bunch of pizzas from this highly rated Chicago Lou Malinotti's restaurant. I bought I had a dozen goldfish delivered to my house. Did you know you can buy goldfish from Amazon? And it was just like, it showed up, and Major was just like, what is happening? And we had a little pond in the back. So we put them out there, and just, it was almost like absurdist, but it was just like, I was like, anything to kind of have fun and bring a sense of joy was really important. And just even just small ways, because it was, it still is a dark time for a lot of folks.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
actually, I remember.
Lyndsay, I was going to say, and honestly, I learned, this is kind of a jazz sensibility that, or, R&B, music, being able to hit on the minor chord, but also resolve. And jazz and blues music is often about this wrestling with that. And I've learned a lot from that. Sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
No, that of course makes me think of one of my favorite preachers, Otis Moss, because he's really big on that, about the jazz and the in hip hop. But he talks a lot about the when people improv, like, improvisation, and then figuring out, because you didn't know what was going to happen because you're improvising it, and so then figuring out what it looks like to reach resolution. That's a really lovely analogy for this too. I just was going to say, I remember when you ordered those goldfish, because then I was like, you really can get anything from Amazon. Like, you just buy a box of live goldfish. Yeah,
that's crazy.
Pretty impressive.
I'm not even sure how I thought of it, but somehow.
That's awesome. Well, I know our time is up. Is there anything that I was supposed to ask you and I didn't about your sermon yesterday?
No, you thought a lot about more than I did. Usually by noon on Monday, I've so far forgotten it that I've moved on to the next Sunday. So this has been kind of fun to explore some of those themes. And I think, one of the benefits of being kind of an every Sunday kind of preacher is I don't feel like I've got to say it all on one Sunday. And you got to say enough, but don't say too much. And so it's always, and hopefully, there'll be more that'll help make sense of some of these themes as we go forward.
Well, I've really appreciated this sermon series. I thought you did a really lovely job walking through all of these and helping us think about them in new ways. I love this time on Mondays. Tell us, what is the sermon series for January?
So we're going to do the short stories of Jesus, and we're going to look at the parables of Jesus. So I think we've got 8 or 9 parables. Some of them are the real well-known ones. We're going to do the Good Samaritan. We're going to do the prodigal son, but we're also going to do some kind of more lesser known parables. And I'm really excited because I think the parables offer kind of, multivalent meanings, and try not just do the obvious stuff. And so it's always been my contention that Jesus was really one of the greatest teachers that ever lived. He was a genius. And I think his parables are one of the reasons one of the ways he displayed his genius. And I think, how can we take them seriously and learn from them about life and God's story and our own story amidst that? So I'm looking forward to it. I look forward to learning a lot. So.
Good. I'll look forward to it as well then.
Yeah,
thanks
I think you're
so
preaching
much.
A couple of them, so you better.
Yeah, so I hope I have the good ones. Not the hard ones. Well, good. And then Christmas Eve, what times are we gathering together Christmas Eve?
We have services 3, 5, 7, 8, 10, and 11.
Okay, good. So opportunities for everyone then.
Yeah, it's going to be great. We look forward to seeing you all here.
All right, thank you so much.
Thanks, Lyndsay.
Bye.